Welcome to Nikki's Nightmares, where chilling tales come to life. In today's terrifying story, we explore missing 411 cases, where people vanish and leave behind only silence. No screams, no struggle, no trail, just abandoned belongings and questions that echo through the trees. These disappearances don't follow rules, and the deeper you look, the more unsettling the pattern becomes. If you love scary stories, paranormal encounters, and true horror experiences, you're in the right place. Make sure to like, subscribe, and join me as we delve into the deep dark and the mysterious. The phenomenon known as Missing 411 was named by retired police officer David Paulides. It isn't a formal law enforcement classification. It's a label, one used to describe a disturbing pattern of disappearances that refuse to behave like ordinary missing person cases. These aren't simple accidents. They aren't routine search and rescue failures. Again and again, the same details surface. Search dogs lose the scent abruptly. Clothing or belongings are found in places that make no sense. Victims vanish only to be discovered miles away, sometimes uphill, across terrain seasoned hikers struggle to cross. Children are found alive in conditions they should never have survived. Bodies are recovered with no clear cause of death. Weather shifts suddenly, crippling search efforts, and many disappearances occur near granite and boulder fields, an unsettling detail some believe may be significant. Most chilling of all, there are often no answers, no suspects, no conclusions, just people who were there one moment and gone the next. Every year, nearly 600,000 people are reported missing in the United States. It's a staggering number. But missing 411 cases stand apart because they overwhelmingly occur in wilderness areas, national parks, forests, and remote terrain, places meant for hiking, camping, and escape. Water is often nearby, and the cases seem to cluster in specific regions, places like Yosemite, the Grand Canyon, and the Great Smoky Mountains. Sometimes nothing is ever found. Sometimes remains surface years later, far from where the person vanished, and occasionally someone is found alive, but changed, confused, unable to explain what happened. With memories missing, like time itself was taken from them. Dennis Martin, the boy who never came home. On June 14, 1969, the Martin family was enjoying a camping trip in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Tennessee. It was meant to be a simple getaway, fresh air, family time, a peaceful Father's Day weekend in the mountains. 6-year-old Dennis Martin was there with his father, William Martin, his grandfather Clyde Martin, and his older brother Douglas. Another family they were friends with was also camping nearby. At one point, the other family began walking back toward the campsite. Dennis, playful and mischievous, decided to scare them. He ran a short distance down the trail and ducked into the woods, planning to jump out and surprise them as they passed. 5 minutes went by, then 10. The other family arrived at the campsite, but Dennis did not. When asked where he was, they said they never saw him. William and Douglas immediately went searching. They called his name, they checked the trail, they pushed into the woods, they searched for 2 miles, shouting, listening, hoping. Nothing. Dennis was gone. Park rangers were alerted, and as the hours passed, the search exploded in size. Over the following days and weeks, more than 1,400 people joined the effort. Park rangers, the National Guard, Green Berets, Boy Scouts, and volunteers from all over the region. A 50-square-mile area was scoured in what became one of the largest missing person searches in American history at that time. No footprints, no torn clothing, no blood, no signs of a struggle. It was as if Dennis had simply ceased to exist. Then came a chilling report. Miles away from the campsite, another family, the Key family, claimed they heard a child scream. Moments later, they reported seeing a dirty, unkempt figure moving through the trees, carrying something slung over its shoulder. The implication was horrifying. Searchers rushed to the area. Once again, nothing was found. Speculation ran wild. Some believed Dennis wandered off and succumbed to the wilderness. Others suggested a bear or mountain lion attack, but there was no evidence, no disturbed vegetation, no blood, no remains. One detail stood out. A possible set of footprints was discovered. The size and tread matched Dennis's shoes, but the prints showed one shoe and one bare foot. A child walking through rugged terrain with only one shoe would clearly be in distress. But officials dismissed the tracks, believing they belonged to a young searcher. Years later, an illegal ginseng hunter claimed he had found a child-sized skeleton in the area, but when authorities searched for it, it was gone. The man said he hadn't come forward sooner because he feared prosecution. Complicating everything was a rainstorm the night after Dennis disappeared, likely washing away any remaining evidence. And with over 1,000 untrained volunteers moving through the area, any fragile clues that survived may have been destroyed. The Park Service later changed its search protocols because of this case. But Dennis Martin was never found. More than 50 years later, his disappearance remains one of the most haunting unsolved cases in American history. A 6-year-old boy went into the woods and never came back. The Smoky Mountains keep their secret. Thelma Pauline Melton, the woman who walked ahead. The Great Smoky Mountains are known for their beauty, rolling forests, winding trails, and the quiet promise of peace. But beneath that calm, there are places where people vanish and are never seen again. This is one of those stories. Thelma Pauline Melton, known to friends and family as Polly, was born on February 26, 1923. At the time of her disappearance, she was 58 years old and married to a man named Bob Melton, a 78-year-old retiree whose health had been steadily declining. Polly had been married before. This was her third marriage. But she had no children of her own. Bob had 2 adult sons from a previous relationship. The couple lived a quiet, nomadic life in an Airstream trailer. Their permanent address was Jacksonville, Florida, but every fall, like clockwork, they spent 3 months at Deep Creek Campground in North Carolina, just outside the borders of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Polly loved it there. She loved the trails, she loved the woods, and she loved to hike. Every day, weather permitting, Polly would hike with friends. She never went alone. She avoided difficult terrain and preferred easy, well-marked paths. Her favorite was the Deep Creek Trail, a familiar route she had walked countless times before. On September 25, 1981, Polly set out on that very trail with 2 close friends, Red and Trula. They began their hike around 3 p.m. From the start, Polly lagged behind, walking more slowly than usual. Her friends teased her gently, but nothing seemed truly out of the ordinary. An hour later, around 4 p.m., the group turned back toward the campground. That's when something changed. As they neared the area where Polly and Bob's trailer was parked, close to a nearby parking lot, Polly suddenly began walking faster, much faster. At first, Red and Trula assumed she was reacting to the earlier teasing, but Polly didn't slow down. She sped up. She climbed one of the hills along the trail, pulled farther ahead, and then vanished from sight. When Red and Trula reached the trailer around 4:30 p.m., Bob was exactly where they'd left him, alone. He hadn't seen Polly return. He had no idea where she was. Panic set in. Friends immediately began searching the trail, calling out Polly's name, questioning other hikers, anyone who might have seen her. No one had. After 2 hours, park rangers were notified. Police were called in. Investigators attempted to track Polly using her footprints. One of her shoes had a distinctive cracked sole, making it easier to identify her trail, at least at first. Her tracks were visible for a short distance, and then disappeared, obscured by the footsteps of others. There was no evidence she had left the trail. The park was shut down. Over 150 searchers and 9 tracking dogs combed the area. The dogs picked up Polly's scent on a fallen tree in the woods, but nowhere else. Authorities dismissed this as insignificant, suggesting she may have rested there or stopped to smoke. Nothing else was found. 4 days later, the trail reopened. On October 2nd, the official search was called off. Polly Melton was gone, and the questions were only beginning. Polly suffered from high blood pressure and frequent nausea, conditions she required daily medication for. She was not allowed to drive alone. Bob handled all transportation. She was described as extremely private, reserved, and routine-oriented. For 4 years, Polly volunteered at the Presbyterian Nutritional Center every fall while staying at Deep Creek. She always worked Fridays, except that week. The day before her disappearance, Polly didn't sign up to work the next day, something she had never done before. That same day, she used the center's phone repeatedly. Her supervisor said Polly had never used it once in 4 years, until that day. No one knows who she called. Her minister later revealed something else, something no one else knew. Polly had confided that she was having an affair with another man. She felt deep guilt over it. She had also been emerging from a long depression following her mother's death in 1978 and seemed, at last, to be improving. No one ever identified the mystery man. One theory suggests Polly planned her disappearance, that she walked slowly at first, conserving energy, knowing she'd need to move quickly at the end, that the nearby parking lot wasn't a coincidence, that someone was waiting for her. But Polly left behind her medications, her ID, her bank account was never touched again. Another theory suggests kidnapping, but there were no screams, no struggle, no witnesses. Then there's suicide. Bob's Valium prescription vanished the same day Polly did. Polly herself had once been prescribed Valium, but no longer was. Even so, experts note it's difficult to fatally overdose on Valium alone. And then, 6 months later, something strange happened. A check in Polly's name was cashed in Birmingham, Alabama, 300 miles away. The signature appeared to be hers. The teller couldn't remember who cashed it. Polly's Jacksonville bank account remained untouched. But Polly had been born in Alabama. She still had family there. Was it her or someone else? Polly was declared legally dead in 1988. Her sister waited until their father passed before laying her to rest in 1991, because he believed, until the end, that Polly was still alive. The National Park Service still lists her as missing. No one knows whether Polly left the park or disappeared inside it. But something was different that day, something she knew. And whatever it was, it carried her into the woods and out of sight forever. Don Kemp, the man in the blizzard. On the morning of November 16, 1982, an eerie discovery was made along a desolate stretch of highway in the Wyoming prairie. Sitting alone on an off-ramp 40 miles from the nearest town was a relatively new Chevy Blazer. Its engine was still running. The doors were wide open, and clothing was scattered across the roadway as if the vehicle had been abandoned in a sudden panic. The owner of the SUV, 35-year-old Don Kemp, was nowhere to be found. 4 years would pass before Don's body was discovered just a few miles from where the vehicle had been left behind. Authorities would ultimately rule his death an accident, exposure during a winter blizzard. But Don's mother, Mary Kemp, has never accepted that explanation. My son was murdered. I definitely believe this. Absolutely. He was murdered. Don Kemp had once been a rising star in New York City, an advertising executive with a promising future. But after a devastating traffic accident left him severely disabled, Don began to change. According to his sister, Kathy Dobe, he became disillusioned with the material world. New York, once intoxicating, now felt hollow. Don longed for something quieter, simpler, more meaningful. In September of 1982, Don sold nearly everything he owned and began driving west. His destination was Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where he planned to write a book about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. The day before his disappearance, Don was seen alone in a museum in Cheyenne. For nearly 2 hours, he wandered through the galleries, speaking to no one. When he left, he accidentally forgot his attaché case. Inside were his traveler's checks, diaries, and driving glasses, items he would have needed on the road. The next morning at 10 a.m., Highway Patrolman Randy Teeters came across Don's abandoned vehicle. He would later say that nothing about the scene made sense. This wasn't an old, broken-down car. This wasn't a man stranded without options. And this wasn't a place anyone would simply walk away from. Nearby, Teeters noticed something even more unsettling. A single set of footprints led away from the highway and straight into the vast, empty prairie. No return tracks, no signs of struggle, just one lonely path disappearing into nothingness. Authorities speculated that Don may have been disoriented, possibly affected by medication or mental distress. The sheriff's department concluded that Don had wandered off alone. Mary Kemp disagreed. She was certain her son had not walked willingly into the freezing wilderness. As search efforts began, a deputy helicopter flew over the area for hours. The terrain was open and flat, visibility stretched for miles, and yet there was no sign of Don Kemp anywhere. Later that same day, deputies found a duffel bag lying near the footprints. Inside were Don's belongings, clothes, laundry soap, and a teapot. Mary believed the bag had been staged. Farther out, searchers followed tracks to a barn 6 miles from the highway. Inside, they found 3 of Don's socks and a small pile of sticks arranged as if someone had tried and failed to start a fire. Then the weather turned violent. A powerful blizzard swept across the prairie, halting the search completely. 3 years later, hunters stumbled upon Don Kemp's remains, only 3 miles from where his SUV had been found. An autopsy showed no signs of foul play. The sheriff believed Don had survived for days, hiding, avoiding searchers, before finally succumbing to the cold while trying to return to his vehicle. That should have been the end of the story, but it wasn't. 5 months after Don was presumed dead, he was reportedly seen, alive, more than 150 miles away in Casper, Wyoming, not once, but twice. Witnesses placed him at a traveling Abraham Lincoln exhibit, and later at a local tavern. A bartender distinctly remembered serving him. Then came the phone calls. One of Don's closest friends returned home from vacation to find 6 messages on her answering machine. Each one was from Don. She recognized his voice immediately. "I'd like to speak to you again. Call me." The calls traced back to a trailer in Casper, Wyoming, When she called the number, a man answered and said Don was out. Telephone records confirmed the calls were real. The man renting the trailer denied everything. He claimed he had never met Don Kemp, never seen him, and had no idea how those calls were made from his phone. He insisted the phone company must have made a mistake. Mary Kemp wasn't convinced. She traveled to Wyoming herself, desperate for answers. When she finally confronted the man by phone, she accused him of lying. He hung up. 3 weeks later, he moved out of the trailer and left Casper. So what really happened to Don Kemp? Did he wander into the prairie and freeze, only to somehow make phone calls months later? Was he abducted, relocated, silenced? Or did something follow him out of that wilderness, something that wanted him gone? His body was found close enough to walk back to his vehicle, but the mystery remains vast and unanswered. In the endless silence of the Wyoming prairie, Don Kemp vanished, leaving behind footprints that led nowhere, phone calls from beyond the grave, and a question that still echoes through the cold. What really happened to Don Kemp? The Sodder Children. On Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1945, the Sodder family gathered inside their modest home in Fayetteville, West Virginia, unaware they were celebrating their last holiday together. George and Jenny Sodder lived there with 9 of their 10 children. That night was filled with warmth, laughter, and anticipation. Their oldest daughter, Marion, had returned home from her job at a dime store with gifts, small toys for her younger sisters, Martha, Jenny, and little Betty. The children were thrilled. They begged to stay awake longer than usual, unable to sleep with excitement buzzing in their chests. At 10 o'clock, Jenny agreed, on one condition. Maurice, 14, and his younger brother Louis, 9, were to finish the evening chores before heading upstairs to the attic where they slept. Confident the children would follow instructions, Jenny took her 3-year-old daughter Sylvia upstairs, joined her husband George, and went to bed. The house settled into silence. At 12:30 a.m., the telephone rang. Jenny awoke and went downstairs to answer it. On the other end was a woman she didn't recognize, asking for someone Jenny had never heard of. Laughter echoed in the background. Glasses clinked. The caller's voice was strange, and her laugh, later recalled, was unnerving. Jenny told her she had the wrong number and hung up. As she returned to bed, something felt off. The lights were still on. The curtains were open. These were things the children always handled before turning in. Jenny noticed Marion asleep on the living room couch and assumed the others had already gone upstairs. She closed the curtains, turned off the lights, and went back to bed. At 1 o'clock in the morning, Jenny was jolted awake again. Something had struck the roof. A loud bang, followed by a rolling sound. Then nothing. 30 minutes later, the smell of smoke filled the air. Jenny rushed downstairs and discovered flames crawling up from George's office, around the telephone line and fuse box. She screamed for her husband. George woke their older sons, John and George Jr., and together they rushed into the freezing night. 6 members of the family escaped. 5 did not. The parents and surviving children screamed for Maurice, Louis, Martha, Jenny, and Betty, trapped somewhere above them. But the stairway to the attic was already engulfed in flames. There was no way up. Their voices echoed into the fire, unanswered. What followed felt less like misfortune, and more like something working against them. The telephone was dead. Marion ran barefoot to a neighbor's house to call for help. A passing motorist tried calling from a nearby tavern, but the phone there was broken. Precious minutes slipped away. George tried to climb the outside of the house and broke a window, slicing his arm. He searched desperately for the ladder that was always kept against the home, but it was gone. A water barrel that might have helped was frozen solid. His work trucks, both functioning perfectly earlier that day, refused to start. Every escape blocked, every rescue attempt thwarted. For 45 agonizing minutes, the Sodder family stood in the cold and watched their home burn until it collapsed into itself. By the time the fire department arrived hours later, there was nothing left but ashes. Fire Chief F.J. Morris told the family something unsettling. No bones were found, no remains, nothing that should have been left behind if 5 children had burned inside the house. Despite this, officials ruled that the fire had been caused by faulty wiring, a conclusion George strongly disputed. The house had been recently rewired and inspected. Even more chilling, one of the men who sat on the coroner's jury was the same man who had previously threatened George, telling him his house would burn down and his children would be destroyed because of George's outspoken criticism of Benito Mussolini. Death certificates were issued anyway. The Sodders never accepted them. Instead of rebuilding, George and Jenny turned the land into a memorial garden. Along Route 16, they erected a massive billboard bearing the faces of their missing children, offering a reward for answers. It stood there for decades, a silent accusation. As the years passed, strange leads continued to surface. A woman claimed one of the children was alive in a convent in Italy. Sightings were reported across the country. Then, in the 1960s, a photograph arrived in the mail showing a grown man who bore a striking resemblance to Louis Sodder. On the back was a cryptic message and a name. The photo was postmarked from Kentucky. The family hired a private investigator to follow the lead. They never heard from him again. For the rest of their lives, George and Jenny Sodder poured everything they had into finding the truth. George died in 1968 without answers. Jenny died in 1989, still wearing black, still refusing to believe her children were gone. Their surviving children, and even their grandchildren, continued searching well into the modern era, and yet, to this day, no bodies, no proof, no closure. 5 children vanished into the flames of Christmas Eve, leaving behind one question that has haunted generations. Did the Sodder children die in that fire, or were they taken while the world was watching the house burn? The story ends here, but the terror does not. Join me again, like, comment, and subscribe if you dare.